Thanksgiving was never my favorite holiday, but it wasn't the food or the family that got to me, it was the drive. 6 long hours cramped in my old sedan with my parents, who never stopped bickering. I could have flown or taken the train, but every year my mom guilt-tripped me into driving. This time was no different. My parents had barely buckled in before my mom started in about how I never visit enough, and my dad was already grumbling about how I drive too fast. I just gritted my teeth, turned up the heat a bit, and headed out onto the interstate. The first few hours were the usual misery, punctuated by long silences and occasional barbed comments from the back seat. I zoned out, counting mile markers and trying to block out the noise. That's when I missed the exit. One wrong turn, and suddenly we were on a narrow 2-lane road. Thick forest on either side, trees looming like dark giants. I cursed under my breath and looked for a place to turn around. That's what happens when you don't pay attention, my dad muttered. I bit back a retort, just focusing on finding a safe spot to pull over. Eventually, a small rest area appeared, a single streetlight flickering over a couple of cracked picnic tables and a restroom building. The only other vehicle there was a large pickup truck, rusty but sturdy looking, with a burly guy sitting inside, his silhouette just visible in the cab. "Bathroom break?" I asked, mostly to break the tension. My mom nodded eagerly, already reaching for the door. They both shuffled out, bickering about something trivial, and I leaned back in my seat, letting out a sigh of relief. The man in the pickup didn't move, just sat there staring straight ahead. I glanced at my phone. No signal, of course. A few minutes passed, and then my parents reappeared, getting back into the car without a word. They seemed different, quieter. I figured maybe they'd worn each other out. I was grateful for the peace and put the car back in gear. As we pulled out, I noticed the guy in the pickup truck was still watching us. His gaze followed us as we drove off, making my skin crawl. The road seemed darker now, almost like the trees were pressing in closer. My parents didn't say a word, just sat rigid and silent. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting them to start up again, but they just stared straight ahead. That's when the headlights appeared behind us, the same pickup truck, barreling down the road. I figured he was just some local trying to get past, so I moved over a bit to give him room. But instead of passing, he stayed right on my bumper, flashing his high beams and honking furiously. "Dad, what's this guy's problem?" I asked, glancing back. No response. My mom didn't even flinch. I turned around and saw them both staring straight ahead, not reacting at all. The pickup kept honking, and I was getting pissed. I tried speeding up, but he matched my pace, swerving back and forth like he was trying to get my attention. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled over onto the shoulder, ready to chew the guy out. As soon as I stopped, the pickup screeched to a halt behind us, and the burly man jumped out, rushing toward my window. I cracked it open just enough to hear him. He grabbed my shoulder through the gap, his grip like iron. "Listen to me, son. Those people that got in your car weren't the same as the ones who went into the restroom. I saw them. They came from the woods. Your parents never came back out." His words didn't make sense. I turned to look at my parents, but the back seat was empty. I hadn't heard them get out. My heart pounded as I scanned the dark tree line. The man leaned closer, his eyes wide and terrified. I watched them. I thought it was just some kids playing a prank at first, but when I saw those things slip into your car, I knew something was wrong. "You have to go. Now." I whipped my head around, looking at the dense forest. I could see movement, shadows darting between the trees. Then I heard the car doors slam open. I jumped out, and the man yanked me backward just in time to see them. My parents, or rather, the things pretending to be them, bolting into the woods. Their movements were unnatural, almost crawling on all fours, their limbs bending in ways that made my stomach twist. "Get in my truck," the man barked. I didn't argue. We scrambled into his cab, and he peeled out, leaving my car behind. I watched in horror as the figures, now hunched and distorted, melted into the darkness. The man drove us to the nearest gas station, where he finally relaxed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I've seen them before," he said. "People call them the forest doubles. They come out at night, take the place of whoever they find wandering too close." I thought it was just a story, until tonight. I called the police, but by the time we went back, my car was gone. They didn't find it or any sign of my parents. I tried explaining, but they looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I never told anyone else, never went back to that area. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to driving off with those things, never realizing they weren't my parents. I still have nightmares where I'm trapped in the car, and the things in the back seat are just waiting for me to stop. If you ever find yourself on a lonely road and you stop at a rest area where the woods are too close, pay attention when people get back into your car. Make sure they're the same ones who left, because if they aren't, you might not be so lucky. Driving through the Nevada desert at night felt like being adrift in a sea of black nothingness. The only signs of life were the occasional distant headlights and the soft hum of our Jeep struggling against the long, flat stretches of I-80. My brother Luke was behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the illuminated road ahead. I was trying to keep my mind occupied, flipping through radio stations, but static dominated most frequencies. We had left Salt Lake City a few hours earlier, aiming to reach Reno by dawn. Luke and I took this kind of road trip every summer, but something about this one felt off. Maybe it was the unending dark or the weird tension that had been lingering between us since we left. Luke was quieter than usual, more jumpy. Around 1 a.m., our fuel gauge dipped dangerously close to empty. Relieved to spot a gas station sign up ahead, we pulled into the dimly lit lot. The place looked abandoned, save for a single flickering light above the door. Luke went inside to pay, and I stayed outside, stretching my legs and scanning the barren surroundings. That's when I noticed him, a man leaning against the far side of the building, partially obscured by shadow. He was staring at me. I couldn't make out his face, just the dark silhouette, but the way he was angled, unmoving, sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced toward the store, wondering why Luke was taking so long. Finally, Luke emerged, moving quickly, his face pale. He shoved the pump nozzle in and muttered, "We need to get out of here." "What happened?" I asked, but he just shook his head, his hands trembling as he filled the tank. Once we were back on the road, Luke's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. That guy inside, he wouldn't stop talking about weird stuff. Kept asking me if we were alone. Then he said something strange. Like what? Luke hesitated. He said to be careful driving at night, that people go missing on these roads. And then he just grinned, like he knew something. I laughed it off, but Luke didn't. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, as if expecting the guy to be following us. I tried to lighten the mood, but nothing worked. Luke was on edge, and his paranoia was starting to infect me. About an hour later, Luke pulled over abruptly. "I gotta take a piss," he muttered. We were in the middle of nowhere. No lights, no landmarks, just the road cutting through the endless desert. I got out too, stretching my legs and inhaling the crisp, cold air. The quiet was almost too loud. That's when I heard it. A low, eerie whistle. It echoed from somewhere behind me, and I spun around, trying to see through the dark. "Luke." I called out, but he didn't answer. My heart pounded as I scanned the area. The Jeep's headlights barely cut through the thick night. The whistling grew louder, coming from different directions. Panic clawed at me. I stumbled back toward the Jeep, but before I could reach the door, the engine roared to life. "Luke!" I screamed, but the Jeep lurched forward, kicking up dust and gravel. I saw Luke in the driver's seat, his face pale and twisted in terror. He looked at me, eyes wide, mouth moving as if he was screaming, but no sound reached me. Then the Jeep peeled out, speeding down the highway, leaving me alone. I sprinted after it, but it was gone within seconds. I stood there, stunned, feeling the desert's crushing emptiness all around me. The whistling had stopped. Just as I started to panic, I saw headlights approaching from the opposite direction. I flagged the car down, and to my surprise, it stopped. An unmarked sedan, tinted windows. The driver got out, a man in a dark suit, maybe mid-40s, with a cold, professional air. "You okay, miss?" he asked, his voice steady and calm. I stammered something about my brother being taken, but he just nodded, as if this wasn't surprising. He gestured for me to get in his car, and, desperate, I did. As we drove, he remained quiet, listening as I babbled about the gas station and the strange man. When I finally paused, he spoke. "You're lucky I found you. There's been a pattern of thrill kills on these roads. Groups of people who stalk travelers, scare them, then take them. Your brother might still be alive if we move fast." He didn't elaborate, but the way he said it made me shiver. I asked who he was, and he just showed me an FBI badge. We drove in silence, and I couldn't help but glance at his face every few seconds. Something wasn't right. He didn't have a radio, no communication device, and his suit seemed oddly out of place. Eventually, we pulled into a rest stop, and he told me to stay put while he made a call. I watched as he moved away, out of earshot. My gut twisted when I noticed his car's license plate. It didn't match the format of any government vehicle I'd ever seen. He came back, smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. Change of plans. We'll head back the way you came. Maybe he circled back. That's when it hit me. I wasn't safe. I mumbled something about needing the bathroom and slipped out, moving quickly around the building. I hid in the shadows, heart racing. Minutes later, I heard his car peel out and disappear into the night. I didn't move until dawn, when a trucker found me curled up on the concrete. The police never found Luke or the Jeep. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. Days later, I found out there hadn't been any FBI operations in the area. I still don't know who that man was or what really happened to my brother. Sometimes, I hear that whistling when I'm alone at night. It's faint, but unmistakable. I'll never forget the look on Luke's face, or the way that agent smiled as if he knew more than he let on. I was already regretting the solo road trip from San Francisco to Las Vegas by the time I hit the outskirts of Bakersfield. The sun was sinking behind me, bleeding orange into the sky, and I still had hours of driving through the Mojave Desert ahead. I'd planned to break up the drive, but an unexpected work delay left me late and determined to make up time. The radio was my only company, cycling through rock stations in the occasional static-filled talk show. As I left the last vestiges of civilization behind, the airwaves became sparse, just a few fading country songs and religious sermons. I settled on a station playing classic rock, hoping it would hold out for a while. By the time I crossed into the Mojave, darkness had swallowed the landscape. The headlights carved weak tunnels through the void, and I fought the urge to doze off. Then, just as Hotel California crackled through the speakers, the station abruptly cut out, replaced by hissing static. I fiddled with the dial, trying to recapture the signal, but nothing but white noise. I let it sit for a moment, thinking it was just a dead zone, when a faint, scratchy voice broke through the static. "Welcome to 106.8 FM. Desert Night Radio." The voice was male, low, and raspy, as if the speaker were struggling to breathe. I glanced at the digital display, 106.8 FM, a frequency I hadn't tuned to. My stomach twisted. "This is for the ones who are alone tonight," the voice continued, dragging out the last word. "You know who you are. Driving through the dark. Listening. Watching." A chill shot through me, and I instinctively checked my mirrors. The highway was empty, just my headlights slicing through the dark. "You've been driving for too long, Craig," the voice whispered, pronouncing my name with a sinister hiss. I slammed the brakes, skidding to a halt on the shoulder. Heart racing, I frantically scanned the road behind me. Nothing. Just the oppressive silence of the desert. When I finally collected myself, I killed the radio. I didn't want to hear any more. I couldn't. I knew it wasn't possible for a station to know my name, to know I was out here alone. But curiosity gnawed at me, and after a few minutes, I turned the radio back on. The static persisted, but slowly, new sounds bled through, muffled cries, a rhythmic thumping, and something that sounded like a knife scraping metal. Then came a scream, sharp and agonizing, the kind that punches you right in the gut. I lurched forward, fumbling to change the station, but the dial wouldn't budge. "You can't change the station." "Craig," the voice rasped, "this show is just for you." I slammed my fist against the dashboard, trying to focus on the road. My knuckles were white on the wheel. I just had to keep driving, get out of the range of whatever twisted signal this was. Then came another voice, this one familiar. It was my ex, Rachel, crying, sobbing. "Craig, please. I'm sorry. Help me." My vision blurred with tears as I gripped the wheel tighter. Rachel had died in a car accident a year ago. There was no way her voice could be on this broadcast. More sounds flooded the speakers, Rachel's cries mixing with animalistic howls and the unmistakable crunch of bones. I could hear someone whispering, "Craig, don't stop. Keep going. Don't look back." My mind raced. Had I fallen asleep at the wheel? Was this some kind of stress-induced hallucination? I pulled over again, breathing hard, trying to ground myself. Suddenly, the sound cut out. Just silence. I took a deep breath and checked my phone. No signal. I forced myself back onto the road, pushing the Jeep as fast as it would go. I didn't stop until I reached the neon oasis of Las Vegas. At the hotel, I parked in the underground lot and practically sprinted to the check-in desk. The clerk gave me a weird look as I stumbled over my words, asking for a room. Once inside, I locked the door, turned on every light, and sat on the bed, shaking. Eventually, I gathered the courage to call the local police. They humored me, but when I mentioned the radio station, they got oddly quiet. After a pause, one of the officers said, "Sir, there's no station at 106.8 FM that broadcasts through the desert. You must have picked up a distorted signal or something." That night, I lay awake. I was glued to the door. At exactly 3 a.m., a knock echoed through the room. I froze, holding my breath. "Craig," a voice rasped from the other side. "We're back on the air." The knock repeated, louder this time. I stayed silent, paralyzed, as the handle jiggled, but the door didn't open. Eventually, the noises stopped, but I didn't sleep. In the morning, I checked out early, eager to put as much distance between myself and the desert as possible. On the drive home, I couldn't bring myself to turn on the radio, even when the silence became unbearable. When I got home, I decided to write about the experience to see if anyone else had heard the station. As I typed up the story, I noticed something chilling. An edit had been made to my draft. At the bottom of the page, a single line had been added. "Craig, we're still listening." I deleted the post, closed my laptop, and unplugged every electronic device in my apartment. But sometimes, at night, when everything's quiet, I swear I can still hear that faint, scratchy voice whispering through the silence. When I was 10, my mom had just remarried a guy named Rick. Rick was all right, I guess, quiet, and didn't try too hard to be my dad, which I appreciated. One night, he picked me up from my friend's birthday party, and we headed home. We lived out in rural southern Oregon, and our house was tucked into the woods about 20 miles from the nearest town. It was late, probably around 11 p.m., and the roads were pitch black. Rick was driving his old Ford pickup, and I was half asleep in the passenger seat. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the occasional rush of wine through the cracked window. We just turned onto a winding back road when headlights suddenly appeared behind us. They came up fast, too fast, and the car swerved as it sped past, barely missing our front bumper. Rick muttered a curse and hit the brakes to avoid colliding. The other car shot ahead, fishtailing slightly before disappearing around the next bend. Rick shook his head. "Idiot's gonna kill someone." We kept driving, slower now, and I was just starting to relax when we rounded the corner and saw it. The car that had nearly hit us, crumpled against a thick tree. Its hazard lights flashed weakly, one headlight completely smashed. Rick pulled over, and we both stared at the wreck. A man was slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. "I'll check it out," Rick said, grabbing a flashlight from the glove box. He opened his door, but barely had one foot on the ground when the driver's door of the wreck popped open. A man staggered out, looking surprisingly unscathed for someone who just plowed into a tree. He was tall, skinny, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, and he walked with a slight limp. His face was mostly shadowed, but I could see he was grinning way too wide for the situation. Rick hesitated. "Hey, man, you all right?" The guy nodded. Yeah, just lost control. Damn deer jumped out." He glanced at me, still grinning. "Mind giving me a lift to the gas station up the road? Need to call a tow." Rick seemed uncomfortable but nodded. "Sure, hop in." The man slid into the back seat behind me, and I could feel the hair on my arms standing on end. Something about his presence just felt wrong. Rick didn't say much as we pulled back onto the road. The man kept humming under his breath, tapping his fingers on the window. I turned to sneak a glance at him and noticed his hands were clean, too clean. No dirt, no scratches. Shouldn't he have been scraped up from the crash? The man must have noticed me staring. "You all right, kid?" he asked, still grinning. I just nodded and faced forward. Rick asked where he wanted to be dropped off, and the man just said, "Anywhere's fine. Just need to get my bearings." When we finally reached the gas station, Rick pulled over. The man didn't immediately get out. Instead, he leaned forward between the seats, his breath hot on the back of my neck. "Thanks for the ride," he whispered. He slipped out of the truck and disappeared around the side of the building. Rick didn't waste a second, slamming the truck into gear and speeding out of there. My heart was still pounding, but I didn't say anything. Rick's hands were gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. After a few minutes of silence, I finally worked up the courage to speak. "Rick, did you see?" He cut me off. "Yeah," I swallowed. "There was someone still in that car, right? In the driver's seat." Rick's jaw clenched, and he just nodded. Neither of us said another word the entire ride home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment when I glanced back at the wreck just before we drove off. I was sure I saw a man still sitting in the driver's seat, slumped forward, his head resting against the steering wheel. But that couldn't be right. The guy had gotten in our truck. The next morning, Rick seemed normal, like he decided to pretend it never happened. I asked him if we should call the police, but he just shook his head. Ain't gonna make sense to them. It doesn't even make sense to me. Weeks went by, and we didn't talk about it. One evening, curiosity got the best of me, and I checked the local news for any mention of a crash on that road. There was nothing. No reports, no mention of a car being towed, like it had never happened. Years later, when I was old enough to really think about it, I finally asked Rick again. We were out fishing, just the two of us, and I brought it up like it was no big deal. He looked at me, his face somber. I don't know what we saw, he admitted. But I know one thing. I wasn't about to let that man ride any longer than he did. I just wanted him out of the truck. I pressed him, asking if he thought the guy was a ghost or something else, but Rick just shook his head. I don't know, but I know when something ain't right, and that man, he wasn't right. We never spoke about it again. But every time I drive those back roads at night, I can't help but check my mirrors, half expecting to see a man in flannel sitting in the back seat, grinning at me with that too wide smile. It was late, probably around 2 a.m., and the highway stretched endlessly before me. I'd been driving for hours, coming back from a weekend visit with my parents. I was exhausted but determined to make it home before dawn. My car's old cassette player hummed softly, a folk tune fading into static as I passed the last gas station for miles. That's when I saw him, a figure on the side of the road, thumb out, head lowered. I almost didn't stop, but something about his slouched posture made me feel uneasy. Maybe it was guilt or just plain curiosity, but I slowed down and pulled over. He was young, maybe early 20s, with messy hair and dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. He mumbled a thank you as he climbed in, clutching a worn backpack to his chest. Where you headed? I asked, trying to sound casual. Anywhere, he replied, staring straight ahead. We drove in silence, and I couldn't help but notice his twitchy movements. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear out of the darkness. I wanted to ask if he was in trouble, but decided against it. It wasn't my business. After a while, he spoke. You ever feel like someone's watching you even when you're alone? I glanced at him, unsure how to respond. Sometimes, I guess. Why? He didn't answer, just kept staring out the window. Eventually, the road signs indicated we were approaching a city. He suddenly straightened, as if something clicked in his mind. Here's good, he mumbled. I pulled over reluctantly, a bit relieved that he was getting out. Before he left, he turned to me, his eyes hollow and distant. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished necklace, a twisted, dark metal pendant shaped like an eye. Take this, he said, forcing it into my hand. I am number 5. Confused, I watched as he walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the city. I stayed parked for a minute, the necklace feeling heavy and cold in my palm. I almost threw it out the window, but curiosity won. I shoved it into the glove compartment and drove home. That's when things started changing. It began subtly. My keys weren't where I left them, and my phone would turn up in different rooms. At first, I blamed it on stress and lack of sleep. But then my clothes would be folded differently, and one morning, I found muddy footprints leading from the front door to my bedroom. One evening, I took the bus to work since my car was acting up. A girl around my age sat across from me, but something about her felt wrong. Her gaze was unnaturally intense, never blinking. When I glanced at her reflection in the window, it didn't match. Her head was tilted in the reflection, but not in real life. My stomach knotted, and I got off 3 stops early, practically sprinting the rest of the way to work. The sense of dread grew. I would wake up gasping, cold sweat drenching my sheets, my skin marked with tiny, raw scratches like bite marks. The nightmares were vivid, dark corridors and whispers that grew louder until they were deafening. One night, I noticed a dark spot on the kitchen wall. I thought it was mold at first, but it had a strange, oily texture. Over the next few days, it grew, spreading like a bruise, darker and more pungent, filling the room with a rotten, acrid smell. Then came the crows. They would line the fence outside my apartment, always silent, just watching. Their beady eyes followed me as I came and went. My apartment felt colder, emptier, as if life itself was draining away. My coworkers stopped calling, my texts went unanswered, and people at the store didn't seem to notice me. I would speak to the cashier, but she wouldn't react, like I wasn't even there. Long black hairs appeared in my bathroom, coiling in the sink and clogging the shower drain. I have short hair, always have, so it made no sense. I cleaned them out, But the next morning, they were back, wet and stuck to the tiles. One night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers were louder, forming words that made no sense. I heard a sound from the living room, a scraping noise, like someone dragging something heavy. I crept out, heart pounding, but found nothing except the dark spot, now the size of a large handprint, pulsating on the wall. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a few things and fled, not even locking the door behind me. I wandered the city, too afraid to go home, until dawn broke. Desperate, I did what the hitchhiker had done. I stuck out my thumb. Eventually, a car pulled over, driven by an older man with a tired, kind face. "You okay?" he asked, glancing at my disheveled appearance. I hesitated before answering, but then the words slipped out before I could stop them. "I am number 6. He gave me a strange look, but didn't question it. We drove in silence, and I felt a strange calm settle over me, like I had resigned myself to something inevitable. A few days later, while crashing at a cheap motel, I turned on the local news out of habit. A story flashed on the screen about a young man found dead in a vacant lot, the same hitchhiker I'd picked up. They said he'd been missing for weeks before his body was discovered, skeletal and decomposed. It didn't make sense. He'd been alive when I saw him. Or had he? I keep moving now, never staying anywhere too long. Sometimes I see that girl from the bus standing on the sidewalk, or a crow perched on a lamppost, watching me. And every time I hear a hitchhiker's story, my stomach twists because I know that one day someone else will be telling mine. The necklace still sits in my glove compartment, and sometimes I can hear it whispering, like it's reminding me of something important, something I can't quite remember. And I know one thing for sure, whoever takes it next will be number 7. When I was 17, I thought I was invincible. You know how it is, young, reckless, feeling like nothing could really get to you. Growing up in a small town in Florida, you hear stories that sound more like old wives' tales than anything else. One of those stories was about Banyan Row, a long, narrow road canopied by massive banyan trees whose roots and branches twisted together like tangled fingers. Everyone in town knew the rule: never stop while driving through Banyan Row. Ever. The local legend said that if you stopped, you might never be seen again, or worse, found dead in your car, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Some people claimed to have seen handprints on the outside of the windows, but no footprints nearby. Others swore they'd heard knocks on their car, like something was trying to get in. My mom would say, if you hear 3 knocks, followed by louder ones, don't you dare stop, Tad. Don't look back. Don't look around. Just drive. You understand me. Of course, I didn't take it seriously. I mean, it was just a road, right? But then came that night. I was on my way home from a friend's house, taking the back roads because my old pickup didn't have working headlights. Twilight was settling in, and the quickest way was through Banyan Row. I didn't think twice about it, just cranked the radio and drove on, convinced I'd be fine. The air changed when I hit the start of the road. The light seemed to dim unnaturally, as if the trees themselves were swallowing the last of the sun. I couldn't see much except the winding path ahead, leaves brushing against the truck like skeletal fingers. About halfway through, it happened. 3 distinct, soft knocks on the roof of my truck. I nearly slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering so loud I could barely hear the engine. My mom's warning echoed in my head. 3 knocks. Don't stop. I kept going, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. A few seconds later, the knocks came again, louder this time, like someone was pounding with both fists. I could feel the vibrations through the roof. I didn't dare look up. My foot pressed harder on the gas, and that's when I heard it, a deep, gurgling breath right beside my ear. I nearly veered off the road. I whipped my head to the side, and that's when the driver's side window exploded inward. Glass sliced into my face, and I could feel warm blood trickling down from the corner of my eye. Pain shot through me, and panic made my hands shake. Then I felt it, something cold and damp, brushing against the back of my neck. I couldn't see what it was. The inside of the truck had darkened, like something was blocking out the light. My instincts screamed to stop and get out, but that was the rule: never stop. The knocking continued, now moving to the driver's door, louder and more frantic. Then, as if whatever it was had enough of waiting, the steering wheel jerked violently to the right. I fought against it, screaming as I struggled to keep the truck on the road. The truck skidded, tires screeching, and the whole vehicle shuddered as if something was clawing at the underside. I kept my foot on the gas, heart racing, vision blurring from the blood dripping into my eye. The truck seemed to buck like a wild animal, but I didn't let up. I was sure if I stopped, I'd never make it out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the end of the tree tunnel. I floored it, speeding out from under the canopy. As soon as I cleared the last banyan, the sound stopped, the pounding, the breathing, even the unnatural darkness. I kept driving until I reached the gas station at the edge of town. When I pulled in, I stumbled out of the truck, shaking and bleeding, trying to catch my breath. The attendant, old Bill, took one look at me and paled. "Banyan Row?" he asked quietly. I nodded, still too stunned to speak. He handed me a towel, looking grim. "You're lucky, kid. Most don't make it through when it gets that bad." I looked back at my truck. The roof had dents, like someone had been pounding on it with a sledgehammer. The driver's side door was scratched, deep gouges running parallel like claw marks. I never drove through Banyan Row again. Sometimes, when I'm out late, I still hear stories about people who dared to stop, friends of friends who never came home, or were found dead with that look of terror frozen on their faces. My left eye never fully recovered. The doctor said the damage was consistent with blunt force trauma, but I didn't tell him what really happened. He wouldn't have believed me. The memory of that cold, gurgling breath still makes my skin crawl. To this day, I warn anyone who even thinks about taking Banyan Road to save time. Don't. If you hear those 3 knocks, no matter what, keep driving. Never stop. Never look back. It's better to take the long way than to risk whatever waits under those trees. After our parents died in a car accident 2 years ago, my brother Quinn and I hit the road. There wasn't much keeping us tied to one place, and honestly, being constantly on the move made it easier not to think about what we'd lost. We had each other, and that was enough. We bounced between odd jobs, crashing in motels or sleeping in the car when money was tight. That night, we were heading to Seattle. The roads were slick from a recent rainstorm, and our old Subaru chugged along, the engine rumbling like it always did when we pushed it too hard. Quinn was at the wheel, humming along to his scratchy radio broadcast. I was half asleep in the passenger seat, lulled by the rhythmic sound of the tires against the wet road. When Quinn pulled into the rest area, I barely noticed. He nudged me awake and mumbled something about needing to pee. I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the time, 1:30 a.m. The place was deserted, just a few dimly lit street lamps and a vending machine that looked like it hadn't worked in years. "I'll be quick," Quinn said, slipping out into the cold night air. I stayed in the car, eyes heavy, thinking about just stretching out in the back seat to catch a few minutes of actual sleep. That's when I heard it, the sound of something scraping along the asphalt. I sat up, squinting through the windshield. Quinn was gone, but the noise was growing louder, like something being dragged. Then Quinn burst back into the car, slamming the door shut, his face pale and wide-eyed. "Go. Drive," he shouted. I didn't need to be told twice. I yanked the car into gear and sped out of the parking lot, glancing back just in time to see something move under the flickering streetlight. It was hunched, impossibly thin, with patches of raw, red flesh where skin should have been. The way it moved was wrong, like a spider trying to walk on 2 legs. "What the hell was that?" I yelled, my heart thundering in my chest. Quinn couldn't answer. He just kept looking out the back window, shaking. "It saw me," he whispered. "It looked right at me." We hit the highway, and I kept the car well over the speed limit, convinced that distance would keep us safe. But it wasn't long before we saw it again in the side mirror, running along the shoulder, impossibly fast, keeping pace with us despite the speed. "Faster!" Quinn shouted, gripping the dashboard. I floored it, and the Subaru groaned as we pushed 90. The creature was still there, its limbs bending unnaturally, its skin, or lack of it, glistening under the occasional streetlight. Then, out of nowhere, red and blue lights flashed behind us. A police cruiser was gaining on us, siren blaring. I pulled over, my hands trembling. The creature vanished, as if melting into the shadows. The officer approached cautiously, tapping on my window. I rolled it down, stuttering apologies, trying to explain the thing that had been chasing us. The cop just looked at me like I was crazy. "You kids been drinking?" he asked, his flashlight making me squint. "No, there was something back there," I insisted. The officer sighed, clearly not buying it. He walked back to his car, probably to run our plates, when suddenly a blur shot out from the trees. The creature leapt onto him, knocking him to the ground. The cop screamed as the thing tore at him, its bony fingers ripping through his uniform. Quinn yelled at me to drive, but I was frozen, watching as the creature tore the man apart, making sounds that weren't human, like it was trying to mimic screaming but couldn't quite get it right. Eventually, survival kicked in, and I hit the gas. We drove for miles, not speaking, just trying to breathe. I didn't know where we were headed, just away from that nightmare. By dawn, we found ourselves in a small town. We pulled into a diner parking lot, desperate for some semblance of normalcy. Quinn went inside to call the police, while I stayed in the car, still shaken. When he came back, his face was even paler than before. "Sammy, the cop's here." I looked through the diner window and saw the officer, same uniform, same face, sitting at the counter like nothing had happened. "That's not possible," I whispered. Quinn dragged me inside, and we approached the officer cautiously. He turned, gave us a cold, unnatural smile. His eyes looked too shiny, and his skin seemed stretched too tight over his face. "Y'all all right?" he asked, his voice distorted, like a recording played backward. Quinn stammered something about needing help, but the officer just smiled, his mouth twitching oddly. I noticed something dark soaking through his shirt, blood, fresh and wet. We bolted out of the diner, jumping back into the car. As we sped out of town, I pulled out my phone, frantically searching for news. That's when I saw it, a missing person report for a local police officer. The date was last night. It didn't make sense. I turned to Quinn, showing him the article, and we both sat in stunned silence. We kept driving, not stopping until we were well out of that town. Later that night, as we huddled in a motel room, Quinn whispered something that stuck with me since. What if it wasn't just chasing us? What if it needed someone to take the place of? I didn't have an answer. We never saw that officer or whatever had become of him again. But every time we pass through a small town, I can't help but watch for that face, that too wide smile. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear those distorted words. "Y'all all right?"